I'm Sara Greiner.
I'm Sara Datsko.
And I'm Slak.
What do disabilities have to do with diversity? Diversity is the condition of having or being composed of differing elements. More specifically to this presentation, it is the inclusion of different types of people, as people of different races or cultures, in a group or organization. And disability is a physical or mental condition that limits a person's movements, senses, or activities. We're going to be focusing on a school environment. As you know, a lot of colleges place a huge amount of importance on diversity. However, people with disabilities are not at all acknowledged as a minority group, or one that can contribute to society. This may be attributed to the belief that people with different disabilities don't have much in common. However, this proves to be false, as many people with disabilities agree that they share many of the same experiences and problems and form some sort of a culture. They really should be included in diversity because disability shapes people's experiences in a unique way, and society needs to adapt in order to include them. However, unfortunately, there is a lack of education on disabilities, so they often experience discrimination in the classroom, and professors are unaware of how to accommodate these students or help them improve. We'll go more into that a little later. Unfortunately, this also carries on to graduate schools, even in psychology programs, where the students will become future psychologists who will most likely end up with a client with disabilities, and because they're unaware, or because the topic of disability and students with disabilities are marginalized, they won't be very successful in helping these clients with disabilities. So we are not training non-disabled psychologists to work with clients with disabilities, nor are we training many psychologists with disabilities, which I think is rather unfortunate, since someone with a disability would be very helpful to a client or someone else with a disability.
To go a little bit more into disability within graduate programs, specifically clinical psychology, many of these clinical programs typically offer limited courses in disabilities, and they mainly focus on cognitive disorders rather than psychological and physical disorders. For example, some of the main focuses are exceptional children, mental retardation, developmental disabilities, learning disabilities, and language disorders. And none of these address psychological or physical disabilities. Additionally, students in these clinical psychology programs who have disabilities themselves typically don't see themselves represented very well in the curriculum. They usually have limited physical access to internships, which gives them a feeling of invisibility, and then they get discouraged from pursuing their degree. So we read an article that kind of frames our way that we think about disability into three different models: moral, medical, and social, which I'll get a bit into in the next slide. Each of these three models have positive and negative aspects associated with them. And the article that we read outlines these three models on 7 different dimensions mentioned here. Some of the examples would be sample ideas, goals of intervention, and the negative and positive aspects of each of the models. So to go a bit more into these models, the first one, as I explained before, is the moral model. And it's based on the idea that the disability is caused by sins, an evil spirit, and it's a test of faith of the person with the disability. So something positive that can come out of this model is that there's a special relationship with God with the patient, and the patient has a sense of greater purpose. There's like a greater reason that they have their disability or disorder. But something negative that can come out of this model is that they shame themselves and they try to disclose or conceal their disability. The second model, which is the medical model, focuses mostly on the disability of the bodily system. So it doesn't take into account the societal implications of having a disability. So this can, a positive thing that can come out of this is there's a lessened sense of stigma of the person with a disability, but something negative is that they realize there are services for, but not by, people with disabilities. So they see themselves represented, but not very well, because there are systems that are out there for them, but they're not implemented by other people with disabilities. And the final model, the social model, is the one that clinicians recommend their clients start to adopt, and that's because it is based on the idea that disability is a social construct. So the issue isn't within the person who has the disability, but rather society has an issue with integrating these people into normal society. So this, fortunately, promotes the inclusion of disability, but unfortunately, people with a disability can sometimes feel powerless when it comes to social and political changes.
So, as being members of society, people with disabilities are a minority. As with any society, there is a minority and a majority. There are many ways in which the populace of people that have disabilities are like and unlike other members of minority groups. The ways in which that they are like other minority groups might not be so surprising. They include prejudice, stigma, discrimination, and oppression. One such way that they are like other minority groups might not be so natural to think of, and that is affect regulation. And this might be a new term, so what that means is that people with disabilities are usually seen or expected to be cheerful or happy or positive about their situations, and that will grant them more acceptance in society. However, when they are angry or resentful about their situation, that grants them a little bit less acceptance into society. Ways that they are unlike other minority groups include some very special circumstances. One of these is that separate is still not equal for people with disabilities. People with disabilities need to enter buildings through different entrances than able-bodied persons might have to use a sink that's at a lower level than people with able bodies, and other things like that. One striking difference is that people with disabilities are usually the different member of their family. People of other minorities tend to have the same structure within their family, and there they can find structure and support. However, people with disabilities tend to be the only ones in their family circumstance with obstacles. Additionally to that, people with disabilities have to go through physical management, and with that, they have to undergo daily pain in some instances, daily inconveniences, and other things like that. And to make life better for them, they might have to go through certain financial burdens in order to get equipment or things that would make life a little bit easier that other people or other minority groups might not feel. So one giant way that people with disabilities are affected in the same way that people in other minority groups are is through language. In the 1970s, there was a big step toward people first language, and this helped a lot. So instead of saying disabled people, you would start to say people with disabilities, or in such a case as people with cerebral palsy, instead of objectifying their disease. The terminology within the language was also scrutinized, and people with disabilities started to take back the words that were belonging to them instead of being used against them by people in the outside world. One such word is retarded, and this is a big deal still today. Recently, it's been taken much more back into the community of disabled people, and people on the outside of that group tend to think or should learn to say people with intellectual disabilities. Words can carry much more weight than they think it can. They convey ideas about how the group takes shape, and they also convey idea about how we might feel toward the group as a whole.
So from our presentation, we each just wanted to outline a few take-home messages. So from my section, I wanted to point out the different ways to think about disability in terms of the three different models I mentioned, so the moral, medical, and social model. That the social model is the most widely accepted today, especially in terms of societal implications, because it places the blame on society rather than on the individual with a disability.
And once we do integrate people with disabilities into our society, they really can share their experiences and contribute to society. For example, someone with disability helping someone else with disability.
And once people with disabilities are integrated better into our society, we can begin to understand them better. And these understandings grant us opportunity to connect with them and realize some similarities that we might share. These similarities can help us along to realize that we do have a responsibility to help each and every one of us to grow and learn, and understanding each other is the first step to that. So thank you for listening to our presentation.